Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We are going to do this very quick. I'm going to go ahead and introduce to you guys the Great Depression and the New Deal programs that started in 1933. We have already been through the causes of the Great Depression. Okay, the 6 major causes: consumer spending habits, unequal distribution of income, oversupply and overproduction, government policies that focused on pro-business policies, high tariffs, also the worldwide depression weakening Europe, U.S. tariffs weaken global trade, and then risky stock market practices are leading into the stock market crash, Black Tuesday of 1929. All right, Herbert Hoover is going to be president when the stock market crashes in 1929, and he really does believe that the crash is going to be short and the economy will recover quickly. However, he is wrong. Okay, as a result of the crash, you're going to see the GNP fall, and you're also going to see the major run on the banks where thousands of banks are going to fail due to loans in default. And this is where a lot of people who never even invested in the stock market are going to lose their life savings. Money supply in the nation and the credit is going to decline, and that's going to mean that the economy is going to completely stop. By 1932, this is really going to be the peak of the Great Depression. Unemployment is up towards 25%. All right, the victims of the bank failures represented a big portion of the society where people lost everything, even if they didn't do anything risky during the 1920s or spend excessively. Even if you just saved all your money, you were at risk of losing it when the banks shut down. Okay, the Dust Bowl is definitely insult to injury here because the farmers who are already having a hard time because of the oversupply and the weakening worldwide depression where they can't really export much of their goods into Europe. The Dust Bowl is just a secondary effect of what's going on here. This is where dust storms in 1930 to 1936 ravaged the entire Great Plains area right into these shaded regions. You're going to see another migration here with Okies. That's what we call the farmers who are moving west. They move into California and sometimes even as far east as Chicago to try to find jobs. But because of the high unemployment rate in a lot of those major cities, the farmers are going to be out of luck. Now, the Depression is going to deepen in the first parts of the 1930s to the point where you have a lot of people looking for work. Many people are leaving homes. A lot of men did what they called riding the rails, and they would jump on trains and try to go into new cities and towns looking for work. Americans are lining up in bread lines and soup kitchens to try to feed themselves and their families. And you see from this graph, from 1929 to August 1932, the unemployment rate is increasing. Like I said before, the unemployment rate is going to top out at about 25%, but it's going to be a long road ahead. And this graph that shows all the way up until 1942, where the unemployment rate finally falls again. This 1942 is really going to be more of the World War II era. So the question becomes, what really solves the problems of the Great Depression? Is it really going to be the New Deal programs that are going to be implemented by the government, or is it just going to be the United States entering into World War II, into that wartime economy? By the time 1932 comes around, you're going to have a new politician on the scenes from New York. His name is Franklin D. Roosevelt. He's going to run against Herbert Hoover in the 1932 election. And Franklin Roosevelt, while mostly not very well known, is going to be kind of a refreshing change from Hoover, where his popularity is still declining as of March of 1932, where the Bonus Army is going to meet in Washington, D.C. They were a group of World War I veterans that are marching in front of Congress to see if Congress will pass a bill that will give them their retirement pension early. So here you have a bunch of veterans who want their retirement money monthly early because they're struggling so much with the Depression, yet Hoover sends federal troops out to break up the Bonus Army March. And so what you're seeing here is an attempt of people to petition the government for help, and Hoover is pretty much squashing it. You're also seeing farmers try to fight back with the Farm Holiday Association, where farmers are attempting to block the grain harvest from reaching the market. That's almost like what we talked about with populism, where Mary Lease said, raise more corn or less corn and more hell, because if you block the amount of grain going to market, it's going to increase those prices. All right, the election of 1932 is a wipeout for Hoover. You're going to see that the Franklin D. Roosevelt is going to sweep the nation, 472 electoral votes to 59, and this is going to be considered the end of the Republican dominance of the fourth party system. So we're going to see another shift in our politics here, and this is going to become the beginnings of what is Democratic domination in the fifth party system from 1932 into the 60s. All right, here's the fifth party system. You're going to see some changes for those of you keeping up with those changes in the political parties. Democrats, there is going to be what we call the New Deal coalition, because with a lot of Franklin Roosevelt's actions, he's going to bring a lot of people who are suffering during the Depression onto the Democratic side. Typically, people who were not Democrats before, people like African Americans, for example, who were part of the party of Lincoln, the Republican Party, are now moving over to the Democratic side because they feel like the Democrats are offering people more in terms of help during the Depression. So you're going to see this new coalition of people on the left, where the philosophies start to change a little bit. What you're going to start to see is more social liberalism and social democracy. You're going to see that within civil rights coming up in the following decades, social justice, and also something called Keynesian economics, also known as pump priming, where the government is going to start to pump money into the bottom segments of society to try to have that economic success move up, instead of more of the Republican side over here with the trickle-down economics and supply-side economics, giving money to corporations and bailing out banks, such as what Hoover did during the early stages of the Great Depression. So the Republicans are going to be considered more economic conservatives at this point, and they are going to be very critical of Franklin Roosevelt's power that he's giving into the federal government. So you're going to see the backlash of the Republicans saying that government is becoming too big and too powerful and spending way too much money. All right, so when FDR is finally president in 1933, he does connect with the people in a very specific way. He uses the radio. We call them fireside chats. He gets on the radio and he talks directly to the American people. And this becomes kind of a new thing with presidents. Many presidents after Roosevelt have also used what we call the fireside chat, doing radio shows and television to connect with the viewers at home. He has no specific plans in 1932 when he's running for election. But what he does say is that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. One of the biggest quotes in American history comes from this time period, because he's asking the people to give him, put faith in him that he's going to help America recover. And he believes in what we call the 3 R's. So he believes that we need to do things for the American economy to relieve needy people and relieve some of those struggles that families are under at the beginning of the Great Depression. Recover the businesses and industry that was lost in those early years of the Depression. Remember, the GNP has been cut in half. Lots of businesses are failing. Banks are failing. So Roosevelt wants recovery programs to get those businesses and industries back up on their feet. Also, reform. He also believes that reform of financial institutions that failed during the early years of the Depression was necessary. The banking industry, the stock market, those are 2 industries that Roosevelt believed needed to be reformed. So you're going to see some programs when you go through the New Deal programs, you're going to see some of that in your station's activity. All right, he puts together what they call the Brain Trust, where he brings in a bunch of economists and business people from the community, and he puts them in a table in the White House and says, get it together and do something. Put together programs where you can help the American people, the farmers, families, businesses, banks. Everyone needed a little bit of help. So the Brain Trust was tasked with this idea that they could get together and find these solutions to the problems. Roosevelt also employed what he called the Black Cabinet to advise him on how New Deal programs could impact the Black community specifically. So you're seeing a little bit of support for civil rights here, and the acknowledgement that the African American community in the country was struggling just as much or more and needed specific help in that case. All right, when Roosevelt becomes president in 1933, he's inaugurated, and immediately within the first 100 days of his presidency, he passes what he calls alphabet soup, or the first New Deal programs. And this section is going to include a lot of different programs that have a lot of different acronyms, and they all had different goals. But the idea here is legislation, Congress could pass laws to address every part of this crisis. So, for example, the Bank Holiday, the Emergency Banking Act, is going to address the problem of the run on the banks. Federal Emergency Relief Administration is going to address some of the problems in communities where people have lost jobs and they're food insecure and they don't have basic necessities. You're also going to see jobs programs and programs for farmers, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, Industrial Recovery Acts, Public Works. These are the types of programs that Roosevelt believed that the government had to put together in order for people to get back to work. And if it cost a lot of money, so be it. This was a national crisis and the government needed to be more involved. This is what's really going to be different from Hoover's administration. So this is a 360 in terms of what the government is willing to do for everyday average Americans during the Great Depression. The first New Deal runs from 1933 to 1934. In your stations packet, I'm not going to go into specifics on these. You will need to know the basic goals of a lot of these programs of the New Deal and who they were intended to help, and if they were a relief program, a recovery program, or a reform program. So make sure that you're paying attention to that as you move through your station. One thing to remember about New Deal programs is that the government is going to have to spend an awful lot of money in order to really get these programs moving. So the one thing they do is begin the process of repealing the 18th Amendment. The 21st Amendment becomes the amendment that takes away the 18th. It repeals prohibition. It brings alcohol back to being legal status in the United States, and many of that, what the reason is because not only is it increasing the crime rates in the country, but it's also cutting revenue of people who could be selling alcohol and making profits off of this, businesses, and also the government can place an excise tax on alcohol sales to be able to pay for the large number of programs that are being implemented during the New Deal time period. By 1935, New Deal programs are enacted for 2 years. They are making progress in some areas, but there seems to need another wave of programs. So FDR and Congress passed through another wave considered to be the second New Deal. In this program, you're going to see also programs like the Works Progress Administration, the National Youth Administration, putting people back to work. The government is going to employ writers and photographers and musicians, also actors and actresses to go to work in certain capacities in the country where otherwise they would not be getting a paycheck. So you're going to see that a lot of this money goes into funding government paid jobs for people who are out of work. You're also going to see other protections for certain groups in society, such as Social Security. You've probably heard of that. That is the retiree and disabled Americans' pension if they can no longer work. So Social Security was enacted in 1935 and is one of the longest running programs in American history that still exists. And it becomes the safety net for a lot of people in the United States after the age of 65, and including people who cannot work because of disabilities. So again, be paying attention to the things in the stations packet where these programs that were implemented in the 1930s, they're still around. The FDIC, the SEC, Social Security, 3 of those have a really long-standing impact in the country. Also, in your stations activity, you're going to be seeing a lot of New Deal opposition. There are groups in America that believe that FDR's New Deal programs spend way too much money. Deficit spending is hurting the economy and raising up the national debt. Republicans, especially the economic conservatives of the Republican Party, do not want deficit spending that Franklin Roosevelt is attempting at this point to try to stimulate growth in the economy. You're also going to see groups in America believing that FDR is not doing enough and he's not going far enough. So you're also going to see ideologies such as socialism and even some communist voices in the United States step up and say that the government should really start to implement an annual family income and that everyone should be paid by the government to make sure that they have basic necessities met. So again, the New Deal programs attempt to solve the problems of the crisis. Your job this week is to complete the station's activity where you will research the programs and who they helped. Number 2, you will look at how many Americans were really impacted positively and negatively by the New Deal. So basically answer the question, was the New Deal a good deal for Americans? You will also answer questions in regards to who was really opposed to the New Deal and why were they opposed to the New Deal? Did it really work? By the end of the stations, you should be able to answer the question, was the New Deal effective in solving the problems of the Great Depression? Did the Depression end because of the New Deal? Some historians believe it was not the New Deal at all, but it was actually World War II and the United States jumping into yet another global crisis that's actually going to pull us out of the Depression. But your job this week is to complete the station's activity, and when you get back on Monday, we will spend some time reviewing this before we jump into World War II. I hope you all have a great break, and I will see you next week.